Hello and welcome to our attendees and our participants to the SAFE webinar on Pillars of Power. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on the time zone and the continent to which you're coming to us. Many thanks to SAFE and to Robbie Diamond for sponsoring the event, Pillars of Power webinar, and many thanks to Ben Gieman for moderating the main event, which is a question and answer session with some distinguished panelists. I'm honored to provide some introductory remarks. My name is John Greenert. I am one of the co-chairs of the Energy Security Leadership Council for SAFE. Now, our goal today for the webinar is to first introduce and release the report and its strategy to the public, to provide some breadth and some depth via moderated questions and answers today. And Ben will introduce our panel and he'll moderate the panelists. And to provide some perspective via closing remarks, which will be conducted by Adam Goldstein, who is my colleague and a co-chair of the Energy Security Leadership Council. Ultimately, though, ladies and gentlemen, we want to inspire understanding, future discussion, and real interest in the attainment of energy security, which is so vital to our country. First, let's talk about the objectives of the Pillars of Power project. It was instigated several months ago, and its scope just grew over time as the concept of energy and the problem evolved. We wanted to describe the charter, SAFE's charter, and the evolution of energy security. But most importantly, the purpose of the project is to frame the main issue, which I believe is the fact that energy security is a resource-driven strategic risk. Folks, we are beyond the challenge of meeting peak oil demand. It's about meeting electrical demand. It's about meeting critical minerals delivery, critical products delivery, and ensuring our supply chains. But, ultimately, the report's goal was also to research, to articulate, and to capture what I'll call a framework for action, to lay down the key and essential aspects of energy security for America in an evolving landscape, and to provide recommendations. Right now, there are 30 recommendations. There may be more, there may be less as time goes on, and we resolve some of these recommendations. The report also describes and lays out pretty clearly SAFE's focus of effort over the years. SAFE is a over 20-year foundation, and it started simply to assuring access to petroleum. Let's get out of oil embargoes, the threat of oil embargoes, no more gas lines, and no more spending so much of the national treasure in the Arabian Gulf and assuring the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. So we started that way, but evolved to the diversification of energy in general, which would make sense as we've gotten into fracking, we've gotten into solar, all the other renewables, and of course, storage. We've moved to the relevance of electrification, batteries involving electrical vehicles, and a whole host of uses for batteries today, drones, et cetera. It's also about critical minerals, finding, mining, processing, and perhaps most importantly, assuring the supply chain involved for all of this is resilient. And that's both for commercial and for national security use as well. But the project has expanded to looking at all access to energy, all forms of energy, its generation, its delivery, its modernization, involving manufacturing as well. And really out of it came two key conclusions, which sort of emerged and merged. Number one, civilian and military supply chains have fused in our country. They fused in China a long time ago, and that was due to having the autocracy and the direction of the government. The Department of Defense only uses 5% of the rare earth minerals, and the Department of Defense alone can't sustain its supply chain. It needs help, and it needs the access to commercial supply chain. And number two, China leads the world in this area that I'm describing. And China has exposed our supply chain and our critical minerals vulnerability, and we need to act. Put in other words, and coming from my background as a maritime guy, Pillars of Power represents really taking a fix, adjusting our collective course and speed to reach our goal to secure America's future energy. So speaking of Pillars of Power, let me summarize a little bit about what they are, if you will. First, to expand and secure, think of that as to ensure access to the supply of energy resources to make sure that we are not resource limited. And this is going to require dynamic and parallel efforts, both from industry and from government. For example, we're going to have to simultaneously figure out how to speed up mining permit reform, how to instigate talent in a mine labor force, how to process minerals and deliver critical minerals for electrification. These efforts have to be done simultaneously, folks, to get it done right. It'll involve the United States. It'll involve our allies. It'll involve our friends. It's about both mining on land and also deep sea mining. Number two pillar is to satisfy our energy security needs, to generate and to deliver. All forms of energy are essential and welcome in this regard. It's a market-based introduction. It'll have to continue to be, but the government, in my view, is going to have to help and have to enable through regulation help, permit reform, as I mentioned, some research, tariffs and tax incentives as well. To generate, it'll involve all forms of energy, natural gas, nuclear, renewable, as I mentioned before, and stored energy in view of batteries. And to deliver, we need to refurbish and modernize the national grid. It needs help and it needs modernization. We need to reimagine it. The third pillar is to promote new technologies and maximize the efficiency and diversification therein. We want to support and inspire domestic innovation to reshore and to friendshore where it's appropriate our energy resources. Right now, we're too dependent on foreign, and in some cases, adversary technology. For example, we get most of our low enriched uranium from Russia. That can't be good. And right now, China mines about 2/3 of the critical minerals that we need and that the world needs. That's not good. And China processes over 90% of the critical minerals out there that we need. That's not good. So we need to change this. And while doing that, we need to protect the national energy related technologies that we have from intellectual property theft. The fourth pillar, increased manufacturing capacity within energy and both to be resilient in our, as I mentioned before, in our supply base. We need dual use technology for both drones, commercial drones, military drones, chips, as well as AI data centers, both commercial, both Department of Defense. We need to update our national security procurement procedures to keep the Department of Defense relevant and accessing this energy technology so that we can produce and supply at scale to assure our stockpile of sensors, of weapons, of communications within our military. And we need to make energy support resilient. What I mean by that is no more single source is for our energy support. Right now, today, part of our problem in nuclear shipbuilding is we have too many single source suppliers for nuclear power and for nuclear propulsion. We're in a similar conundrum in battery supply chain technology, some of our IT supply chain technology, and we got to make sure we don't do it for chips, processors, and AI data centers in the future. So in closing, this is not a manifesto for renewables, batteries, EVs, or critical minerals. That's not what Pillars of Power is. It includes all aspects of energy resource and delivery. It's all part of the strategy. The strategy isn't just one part of this issue. Pillars of Power and SAFE are going to continue to evolve. This project has already transcended the last presidential election. It's already evolved since the big, beautiful bill was passed, and it will likely transcend the next presidential election. Some of the recommendations may survive, some may change. We'll continue to study and we'll continue to update. Folks, we're at an inflection point and it's time to act. Thank you so much for listening to me. I'd like to now turn it over to our main event and Ben Geeman, please.
Thank you, Admiral, for so compellingly setting the stage for this discussion of what are clearly some incredibly important, but also incredibly daunting challenges. My name is Ben Geeman. I am an energy and climate reporter with Axios, And I would like to introduce the fantastic panel that we have here today to discuss this report. We have with us retired Admiral Dennis Blair, the former Director of National Security. We have Michael Dunn of Dunn Insights, and we have Jeff Gollin, the VP of Corporate Affairs and Communications for Vale Base Metals. So, Admiral Blair, I'd like to start with you. The report flags China's deployment of economic coercion and mineral diplomacy as strategic tools. Can you shed some light on your personal experiences dealing with China on the nature of this challenge that this report and this introduction has laid out?
Yes, Ben, I try to stay in touch with Chinese leaders and others so I can understand what they're up to. And I think what we have to recognize as Americans is they simply do not accept, do not act by the sort of general rules that were developed in the world economy up until the time that China really began to take off in 2010. So things like not using government spy agencies to gather industrial espionage, to conduct industrial espionage against other countries. Things like roughly comparable environmental and child labor standards to produce your goods. Things like realizing that everybody needs to, like, win-win solutions are good over the long term. The Chinese attitude, as they've come out of what they call their 100 years of humiliation, is a determination to restore China to at least its former economic glory that they believed it has, and to not to respect, but to take advantage of the rules of international commerce that have been developed to China's benefit. And then at the end of the day, they will reset them for themselves. So I think most Americans don't understand this psyche of aggressive, aggrieved economic actions, which really characterizes virtually all Chinese business and government leaders. I'm surprised, for example, of many Chinese friends who have lived long years in the United States, who've gone to our universities, who have worked for our companies, and have gone back to China or not. And when you talk to them, they can't get the idea out of their heads that this is a zero-sum conflict. They have to push the United States off its position. China will take it over. And the idea that all of us Americans are not interested in just pushing China back to where it was in the Great Leap Forward is something they don't accept. So we are dealing with a national psyche of aggression and aggrievement, which we just have to take into account.
Thank you. As a quick follow-up to that, I mean, the current administration seems cognizant of this challenge and, eager to address it, it seems. And, I think one thing that was, obviously in the headlines recently, a big piece of news was the Defense Department taking a direct stake in the rare earth company MP Materials, and also offering other types of financial support, offtake agreements, and so forth. With that framing, what is this administration getting right in terms of these challenges that you just laid out? And where do you think they should be or could be shifting in their thinking?
I think what they're getting right is that we have to take action against China. I mean, for years and years, up until the first Trump administration, we thought that sweet talk, pointing out to China that they would benefit from the overall system that was established, trying to argue to them that it was in their interest to cooperate with global rules just didn't work. And it doesn't work within China. It certainly doesn't work internationally. You have to take action to set lines, set penalties if those lines are exceeded. So I think as a first move, the pretty dramatic moves into industrial policy that have been taken with the MP Corporation are good. I do think we have to really be flexible, though, and as this plays out, adjust while we keep our overall goals quite clear. There's some, different experts have different opinions on the specifics of that deal, and we need to watch them and adjust the government side of it as necessary. We're not going to beat China by becoming China, by setting goals, by setting national champions, and then not caring how much money they lose as long as they can undercut the West. So we have to take the smart moves in cooperation between business leaders and government leaders, while taking advantage of the animal spirits, the entrepreneurial, the hard work of our business sector, which we think will ultimately prevail over a state-planned, completely interventionist government role.
Jeff, a lot of this report and a lot of the discussion this afternoon already has been talking about the challenge here from China, and and the need for an advanced automotive manufacturing base is something that's really prominent in this report. We should also be talking about the supply of raw materials. Jeff, you work for a Canadian supplier of materials and metals for the Defense Department. Can you tell us a bit about Vale's business and operation, and also something else that's been pretty hot lately, U.S.-Canadian trade? What's the status of the U.S.-Canadian mineral trade these days?
Well, thank you very much, Ben, for being here, and it's great to represent Canadian critical minerals, nickel in particular, to this discussion, because with all the talk of strategic vulnerabilities for American industries and American national interest, there are great examples of strategic partnerships that have worked well for decades, and ours is one of them. For more than 70 years, Canada has been the #1 supplier of Class 1 superalloy nickels for the U.S. aerospace and defense sectors, and that mostly comes from Vale Base Metals and our 7 nickel mines across Canada. And most of our nickel produced in Canada, the high purity, high quality stuff that goes into jet fighters and drones and satellites and missiles and weaponry, it comes from Canada and comes from those mines. So we're very pleased that Canadian nickel and Canadian minerals can support American jobs and American security. And that's the question going forward, is what type of partnerships of this magnitude will exist in what is right now a tense trade situation between our two countries. But we share more than borders. We share the same values of freedom, of entrepreneurship, of the free market, and standing up against tyranny. And I think that over the long term, that those trade irritants and relationships will be rebalanced to recognize the strategic partnership that Canada plays in America's defense.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned nickel. I mean, one of the things that's so, I think, challenging about any type of minerals is that often the kind of development timelines are very, very different than political timelines. And, obviously we've got fairly new, or well, I guess at this point, new-ish administrations in on both sides of the border. What do you see as some of the biggest challenges that are facing North American nickel production, either in the kind of near term or, as I said, beyond these kind of political timelines?
Well, I think put the question to Dennis about what is the administration getting right, and two things right off the top are moving with pace and urgency, and looking to reform things such as permitting so new projects can get built. We would encourage any new mineral development in North America. It benefits all of us, from a growing economy to national security. But there's a big difference, I think, between oil and gas development and sort of the time from, hey, I think I've found a reserve or a deposit, to actually getting materials to flow to market. And I think there's a bit of that reality that needs to settle into policymaking and administrators. And I'll give you a little anecdote. We were at Sarah Week in Houston back in March. And we had the occasion to sit around the table with Secretary Burgum and talk about what can industry do writ large to accelerate new nickel mines, or even a nickel refinery in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And to put it in perspective, we have 5 nickel mines in one town called Sudbury, Ontario. And in the totality of America, there's only one commercial nickel mine at this stage. So, Secretary Burgum was proposing, if there was a way in which to give industry all the permitting reforms that would move responsible development forward in as fast a timeline as possible, if there was government funding to de-risk some of those projects, if you could even shield some of those from the invariable lawsuits that may come up whenever you've got large scale resource development, how fast could we get to market, right? Could we have something up and running by midterms.
Mhm.
And our CEO is a brilliant international mining executive, very politely said, if I had all of those things and the labor force to do it and the community support that would welcome that, it's going to take 10 years to flow product to market, to,
Hmm.
from building a mine to a refinery to getting something that would go into the industrial base in America. So I think the timeframes are very different than, say, oil and gas, where if, you found something, you punched a hole, you could get product flowing within 2 years and having a cash flow. So the geology and the economics of mining are very, very different from other sources of energy and natural resources, and are long lead times. So absolutely need to move with pace, absolutely need to move with boldness to attract investment. But getting the materials out of the ground and into the foundries and into the factories in America will take a decade.
Thank you. As we're waiting for Michael to come back with us, I'd love to just zoom way out for a second. Another thing, in addition to the MP Materials investment, obviously we're just coming off the enactment of the what's known as the One Big Beautiful Bill, and I'd love to get some perspective from Admiral Blair and from you, Jeff, in terms of the overall challenges that this report lays out in different areas and the need to reinforce these 4 pillars of power. To what extent do you think the One Big Beautiful Bill affects this, and if so, in what directions?
Let's see, Ben. I'll start, and then Jeff is free to come in with his own opinion. But I think that I look at our competition with China as a very long-term competition. I mean, Xi Jinping has some personal aggressive qualities which have sharpened things in recent years. But the challenge for the United States is to maintain a country which is doing the right things over the long term, can adjust to specific changes from our adversaries as we go, can take advantage of favorable situations. And I think, as many others have pointed out, the underlying thing about this latest bill is the failure to tame the deficit. And we've just seen all over the world, other countries, granted they don't have the world's reserve currency, but eventually you're going to have to pay the piper for spending more than you take in. So the thing that troubles me most is this missing of an opportunity to impose fiscal discipline, at least to reverse the slope of the curve, to get it moving back. So we've got to set foundational things in order, and I think that's what the Pillars of Power report says in the 4 areas that it points out. It doesn't address the fiscal measures you need to take, but they clearly include getting our fiscal house back in order.
Thank you. And Jeff, certainly the bill makes some significant changes on critical minerals policy. I suppose they're not as stark as some of the changes on the investment and production tax credits on the power side. But that said, it does sort of, rewire the system of support for different types of manufacturing and what some of the foreign entity of concern restrictions are and so forth. So with that as a jumping off point, yeah, I'd just love to get your take on what the impact of this huge shift in current policy is going to be.
Well, I think the most important thing is critical mineral diplomacy is going to be so essential for our 2 countries going forward. So far be it from me to provide judgment on a foreign government's a budget. But I will say, back to the thesis of the report, that the need to support an industrial base that is going to be a major consumer of minerals, and that will provide the commercial or economic backbone to make sure that the minerals that the U.S. defense sector needs when it needs them is something that should be evaluated, right? Because the supply is not yet there where American can be mineral independent in the way that it has become energy independent from an oil and gas perspective. And that revolution was amazing and fantastic and changed geopolitical dynamics around the world. The same may yet come on the mineral side. but it will take at least a decade or more. So when we look at what measures were included or excluded in the bill, you have to ask ourselves, are we supporting major investments in large volume mineral production that will serve the domestic industrial base, that will therefore pull forward the security of supply that I think the defense sector and most Americans would want and need?
Definitely. Thank you. There's another question that I had that would be for both of you, which is that, again, to put you, I suppose, back on the spot a little bit, I'm sympathetic to not wanting to comment on a foreign government, of course, but what do you both most want leaders in Washington to understand as they set energy and industrial policy over the next few years?
Well, if I can come back and not dodge a question, I'll say this, for all the attention that Americans and American policymakers have put around OPEC and OPEC's control of the global supply of and pricing for oil, the conditions that the PRC in particular have around the stranglehold on critical mineral supply is double that. One only has to look at nickel, for example, and look at Chinese investment or overinvestment, oversupply, overcapacity build in a place like Indonesia. Indonesia controls 60% of the world's nickel supply. OPEC on its best day is maybe 30% of oil supply. So the ability of jurisdictions such as the PRC to intervene into the marketplace, and that has a downstream effect on producers such as us, on consumers such as our American customers, is gravely significant. And I think so any politician in Washington that maybe lost some sleep about OPEC's control over oil and what that could mean for America, it's twice as bad on the mineral side, and pick whatever mineral you want.
As a quick follow-up to this, that before we throw that question to Admiral Blair, one thing that I have been wondering about is the sort of how nimble or not nimble the U.S. Defense Department and other militaries around the world are to sort of reshifting some of the chemistries needed in different types of technologies, right? So certainly wringing oil out of transportation, I would sort of put in the category of something that is an incredibly long fuse process. On the other hand, I probably get an email once a day, at least once a week, from a new battery startup saying that it's got some type of chemistry that gets rid of the need, or at least largely gets rid of the need for some type of material that we had heretofore thought was entirely critical to the battery supply chain, right? So that's a very long-winded way of asking is the Defense Department nimble enough in terms of adjusting on the demand side to potential changes or security of supply problems with various minerals?
So my observation is the Defense Department is incredibly quick when there's conflict going on. We just do amazing things when the need is clear, when troops are dying, when opportunities show themselves. And if you look at the ultimately very difficult long engagements in Iraq and Afghanistan, you see example after example of just tremendous taking advantage of new ideas, new techniques, new policy. The problem is when we go back to business as usual in peacetime, we get this long, clunking, everybody in the world involved situation. But if we could, I'd like to call Admiral Greener back in. He's lived this a lot more than I have in the armed forces of the United States, Navy in particular, but also jointly, and he probably has some insights in it. But I wish we could maintain that wartime conflict tempo of doing important stuff right when we don't actually have troops in conflict, and when we need to move on things to get us ready to be in better shape when we do send our men and women forward. John, what's been your observation?
Thanks for the opportunity to comment. Everything Admiral Blair says, I completely agree with. Ben, I would add this. When I talk to my those that relieve me, and I talk to folks who are out there now, we have many unmanned aerial, surface, and subsurface vehicles that are just dying to get a reliable, repeatable, safe electromotive force. In other words, a battery.
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of chit chat about, oh, we're ready to do this, that, and the other thing. What's taking the Defense Department so long? I would say they need something reliable that works. It's unacceptable to send out a very expensive unmanned underwater or whatever vehicle, and it crash lands. Uh-oh, what's it doing there with big US Navy across it, scooped up by somebody else? So, and you know, you get my point. The lack of that is so important, and there's no measure for error in this regard. So the consequences are too high. So turning that, getting that out, show that it works. There's wonderful companies that say I can do this, that, and the other thing. There's no doubt about it. When they're orange and they're out there demoing, they look wonderful. You put them out there in the environment. Frankly, they're not working. The biggest problem is the electromotive force behind it. So yeah, I think DoD can respond given the right product.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. And I believe we have Michael back with us. So Michael, can you hear us okay?
Yes, perfectly.
Thank you so much. So yes, we were starting to get into a few moments ago. So, you know, one of the major premises of this report is that the defense industrial base needs to be built atop of a thriving commercial industrial base. And, you know, the automotive sector is key to this. And electric vehicles have more in common with advanced defense technologies than kind of traditional petroleum-powered cars.
Mm-hmm.
You're a top expert on this topic. Can you kind of walk us through what some of the challenges are here?
Well, the challenges are here and now. Just a few weeks ago, we know that Western automakers as a group were thrown into a panic when suddenly they could not get their hands on advanced magnets for their vehicles. What did that mean? People in Europe, Mercedes, BMW, and Audi were crying, we need our magnets. Where are they coming from? They're all coming out of China.
Mm-hmm.
Ford here in the United States had to shut down assembly plants twice. So it isn't something far off on the horizon that we have to worry about. It's immediate. And what that episode drove home was a couple of things. One is we're moving away from an era of just-in-time manufacturing when everything was about efficiency to an era of just-in-case where, yes, we need to get our hands on materials and supplies when we need them. And with China and the United States at a point of heightening tensions, the reliability of supply out of China becomes less and less certain. So what does that mean? We need our own batteries. What do we need our own batteries for? Not just for EVs, but for humanoid robots, for drones, for autonomous vehicles, for navigation systems, for so many defense applications. It's clear that we need the batteries. In order to make sense of an investment in batteries, we also need demand from EVs. So that's our big challenge here is how do we get enough demand to justify investments in batteries? And this is where, very importantly, the conversation sort of takes a fork in the road. There's some people, oh, EVs, please don't talk to me about EVs. EVs are just, no one should be forced to buy EVs in the United States. We don't all need to buy EVs. If 20% of the market is EVs, that's enough to justify investments in batteries. We're talking about 3 million cars a year, 1 in 5. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't have to be whitewashed. We're transferring from gasoline-powered vehicles to EVs overnight. It's just a gradual process, but we need those EVs to justify the investments in batteries. Without those batteries, we're back to square one, totally vulnerable and subject to the whims of supply out of China. That's reality today.
So right now, purely electric vehicles, you know, I'm not lumping in plug-in hybrids, but on the purely electric side, you know, I think in the most recent quarter, according to Cox Automotive, EVs were approximately 7% of new U.S. vehicle sales. What does that number tell you about whether or not we are going to sort of reach this threshold that you suggest where, you know, it doesn't have to be every vehicle sold, needless to say, but that it's sort of sufficient to enable this robust domestic battery supply chain? And as a sort of part two of that question, do you think reaching that threshold is achievable without federal sort of demand side policies such as EV tax credits, or I suppose this isn't quite a demand side policies, but kind of federal sticks like more aggressive greenhouse gas standards for vehicles, which are obviously a de facto sort of market shove, regulatory shove for EVs?
Right. Both of those are sort of built around the customer. And as Americans, we're used to this sense of, well, if it's a better product at a cheaper price, I deserve to have it, full stop. I'm suggesting that we're stepping into a new era where the customer has to think, and we as a nation have to think more broadly in terms of EVs are a necessary component for us to be, to maintain our national sovereignty and our national security. That's just our reality. So how do we get there? One, we need lower cost EVs. How do we get the lower cost EVs? We need to manufacture more of our batteries here in the United States at scale. Second, we don't all have to be pure EVs. The American driving style tends to be big rigs over long distances at high speeds. That indicates, well, we should go to plug-in hybrid electrics, which are great. We don't have to worry about range anxiety or charging stations. We can definitely increase the demand for PHEVs without costing the consumer much in terms of anything, in terms of convenience and range anxiety. So I would recommend that we look at not just pure EVs, your Teslas and Rivians, but also PHEVs and something else called extended range EVs. The idea being all of those will be sources of more demand for those batteries. And the batteries are the crucial point here. I think we all understand that now. Not EVs per se, but the batteries and battery supply chains are so crucial to our national defense.
Thank you. A follow-up question to that, and really this is for anybody, is that, I'm going to steal a point from the energy analyst Kevin Book, who made a point in a research note some weeks ago that we've all become somewhat accustomed to the fact that the regulatory pendulum tends to swing back and forth depending on who's in power. Now, with the big, beautiful bill and some other pieces of legislation, there's not even that certainty that a major congressionally enacted and presidentially signed piece of legislation is going to have staying power. I do sort of wonder whether we've all been sort of lulled into thinking that when efforts to pare back Obamacare failed, that we thought, okay, once something is really in law and sticking around for a while, if it can just get past its infancy, then it's going to kind of survive in the wild. Well, now we've just seen utterly the reverse of that, right? And so that's a kind of long-winded way of asking you, Michael, but all of you, in order to build that domestic supply chain, how can any investor have sufficient confidence that the policies that they've been depending on to get to even to that lower threshold of kind of market deployment needed, how can anybody have any confidence that the policy is going to be durable enough to justify those investments?
That's a great question. And that's our dilemma right now. That's why a lot of investors are on the sidelines. Can I be certain that 5 years from now, the policy will be the same? The short answer is, up until now, no, you couldn't be certain. But increasingly, there's awareness in the United States and in the West that we are facing a sort of Sputnik 2 moment where if we don't get our act together and start to think longer than 5 years at a time, we're going to be China's lunch. That's just real. So as that awareness increases, and as episodes like people not getting their hands on magnets they need to manufacture their cars comes home, then we get a sense of, oh God, this isn't make-believe. This is real here and now. And I have confidence that our leadership in DC and at the state level will become aware, oh yeah, these are the steps we must take to compete into the future.
I would pile on to what Michael said. What SAFE has argued from the very beginning is that the national security aspect of economic decisions is really important over the long term. And in our early years, we tried to get out of this taste better, less filling over oil debate by saying, wait a minute, it makes a difference to Americans over the long term if there's a diversity of energy supplies. If our transportation sector is less than 90% dependent on a commodity which our enemies can manipulate. And I think the same sort of, and I know the same sort of argument is true. In fact, as I think Jeff pointed out, it's even more true in China's throat lock on many of these critical minerals. And I think it's been bad that both parties have not emphasized the national security aspects, but rather run to their bases with either an environmental justification or a sort of free market, don't tell me what to do justification. And I think, as Michael said, the facts of the case are sort of closing in on us, and people are realizing this no matter what their leaders tell them. But it sure as hell would be better if national leadership included this, not only from government leaders, but also, responsible business leaders who know that they can't do business over the long term unless the West stays strong. The United States, its allies, countries that believe in democracy and in free markets stick together. So I think that's our what we have to work on in the long term.
And I would echo that, and I'd actually come back to something Jonathan said opening up, which speaks to some of the opening lines of the report, which is we are at an inflection point. America's at an inflection point, and in a post-COVID world, and with the rise of China and the world in which we live today, I don't think there's any going back. I think the macro picture is set and going to be set for quite some time in the direction of travel. The details may vary from administration to administration, even within an administration's term. But I think the concept, like Michael had said, of moving from just in time to just in case, I don't think any economy in the world is going to argue with that, and that's going to require building sovereign mineral and metals capacity at scale. And that's probably going to take more upfront intervention or participation of the public sector to get over some of the signals that in the marketplace don't justify it, right? I mean, if you were trying to build a private sector nickel mine right now with nickel prices below $15,000, your investors and your board probably would tell you not to do that. Go find some productivity enhancements and increase our earnings that way. But that is going to be of greater national and sovereign significance to get those things built and to have them those are assets that last decades, right? 50 years or more. So this is where I think we're in that awkward transition stage between a way of the world that we wanted it to work to not quite figuring out how it's going to be going forward, but we know the path that we're on. And it's probably going to take more upfront private sector de-risking of major projects to get that infrastructure and that capacity built and running. And then perhaps the private sector follows the government signal rather than the other way around.
Thank you. So, moving from raw materials to the software side of the equation, sort of looking at emerging mobility and autonomous vehicle technology and other sort of software-defined platforms. How do you size up the U.S. regulatory environment and the innovation pipeline here in the context of sort of China's kind of aggressive and high-speed deployment on these questions?
Or we do address that in the report, Ben, and right now it's a hodgepodge patchwork of AV regulations, city by city, state by state, and it certainly can't give confidence to any major car company or outside entrepreneur that they are going to make a big bet when they don't know where they can roll their cars out, whether it might be changed, what the standards are, where the goalposts are. So I think there's a crying need for a federal set of standards on the required safety standards for autonomous vehicles, so that the companies can get to work. Because all of us who have electric cars are quite apart from cost and environmental and all. They are very pleasant cars to drive around in. They're more comfortable. They're less noise. They corner better. There are all sorts of advantages of electric vehicles. And to take the next, but the only thing is, as a driver, you got to sit there with your hands on the wheel and your feet close to the pedals, right? There's no advantage from that point of view. And if we could get to the point that we have these electric vehicles in which we could safely, not have to worry about the operation of the vehicle, it'd be huge. And I think we'd easily meet, if not exceed, Michael's 20% of the market. So what's standing in the way of that a lot is the sort of the patchwork list of local regulations that inhibit large-scale testing of autonomous vehicles and all the benefits of people seeing what they can do for us.
Admiral, to follow that up, how much political appetite do you see for truly effective and strong federal preemption to make sure that that patchwork on the AV technology side is not something that becomes kind of stifling in the ways that you're suggesting?
Well, certainly this administration doesn't have very high regard for the prerogatives of state governments when they get in the way of things it wants to do, does it? And with my time in government and my relations that I've had with state officials, a lot of bedside manner is required, but I think a federal government can pull it off, and I think the facts would support it. I mean, that's in all of these discussions. That's part of what it's hard to mention explicitly, but what is so important is the competence and skill of government officials, their ability to work with the private sector, but not be subservient to it, the ability to work with other levels of government while moving the overall ball forward for the United States. And the competence of federal officials, to me, is a far more important issue than the number, which seems to be capturing the headlines these days. If you have really good federal officials who know what they're doing and are experienced, the federal government can play its very important role well. And if you don't, you mess it up, and we do that at our peril.
Yeah.
Ben, if I may, a couple of observations about the autonomous vehicle markets in China versus the United States. In China, the officials locally are incentivized to maximize the speed with which commercialization happens.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. In the United States, just the opposite. Typically, a local official is incentivized to make sure nothing goes wrong. So that means putting in place, by design or not, lots of obstacles. Having said that, there is reason to be optimistic about autonomous vehicles in the United States. I was just at a McKinsey conference on the West Coast. Waymo was there. People from Tesla were there. And the optimism around our ability to deploy autonomous vehicles at scale safely has never been higher. There's a dip during COVID, a lot of questions, skepticism, but we're back, and Waymo's now, doing hundreds of thousands of trips in California and Arizona. They're deploying to Atlanta, Austin. Tesla's right there with their own deployment in Austin. So there's reason for optimism on the technology side. I feel as though, the United States maybe needs to benchmark how officials in China facilitate the growth of and commercialization of AVs. We can learn some things from them.
Thank you. I wanted to do a sort of a lightning question and then close things out with the final one to Admiral Blair. On the sort of lightning side, I mean, to bring it back to this MP Materials deal, I think that for many good reasons, including many of the ones we've been discussing today, that got a lot of attention. And I think in perhaps different ways on other, across the aisle, but certainly on both sides of the aisle, we're seeing this growing interest in industrial policy of different sorts. And so I guess one thing I'm wondering is the MP Materials deal, are we going to see anything like it, either with another rare earth company or something else on the kind of critical supply chain space, this type of direct investment from the Defense Department or perhaps the Energy Department on the nuclear side? I know one of the really interesting suggestions in the report is that we should have direct purchasing of small modular reactors. Actually, I don't remember if that was on the DoD side or the DOE side. Anyway, is the MP Materials deal, are we going to see something that's a close cousin to that in 3 months, maybe a couple years, or never?
Well, I think it certainly kickstarts some investment opportunity. It may take more within America. Pick another mineral. Rare earths are on everyone's tongue, but it's not. They're not the only ones that face this challenge of investment, and somebody needs to go first and put their cards on the table. So, I do think it. An avalanche starts with a snowball, and it's got to start somewhere. And I know that the G7 is looking, and Canada is trying to drive for a critical minerals production alliance that says, let's do the same sort of thing, but on a global scale, and find amongst us who has supply and who has demand, and can we match that up? So I do think that you will see other countries matching what the US has done, which is to make direct investments to ensure the security of supply for all of us.
Oh, that's so interesting. In industrial policy, it's back. We've been talking about a lot of gigantic challenges and problems, and the report certainly lays out a lot of recommendations that, if implemented, would certainly, get the U.S. well down the road to sort of addressing these problems. And so, Admiral Blair, that leads me sort of back to you. The report kind of just gets into this kind of shift in the American psyche, with the rise of these peer adversaries, one main peer adversary in the form of China. And then it obviously gets into the recommendations that we've been discussing in some detail and that the report gets into in great detail. Zooming way out to look at history, what do we need to change in terms of how we think about this challenge in Washington from a sort of psyche standpoint? And what makes you optimistic about that, if you are optimistic?
I am optimistic, Ben. If you continue at that high level and you're a man from Mars and you look at this planet Earth, you say, why can't America and China figure this thing out? There's a lot of this is not like the Cold War, where we had tremendous ideological opposition. There are no direct territorial issues. There are alliance support issues and so on. And so over the long term, and there's plenty of world economy for both to be successful. So there are plenty of theoretical ways to work it out. The second thing you would observe was that if you have to really take a cold-blooded add up the pluses and add up the minuses that the United States and China have, the edge would go to the United States, clearly, with the kind of energy advantages we have, the technological strength, the entrepreneurial strength. So you'd have to bet on the United States over the long term. So that kind of gives me an underlying confidence. But what is preventing those two ideas? Number one, can't we figure it out so that we can compete in a knowledge that we're both going to be here at the end of the competition, and both countries are going to be stronger and better than they were, but not dominating the world, and that the United States has these inherent advantages, then I think we should, I don't know quite how to phrase it, we should have strong sense of urgency without panic. We should have confidence and commitment. We should have a sort of cautious optimism. This isn't going to happen on its own, but if we combine urgency, good long-term thought, then we can get it right on our side, and that way China will have to adjust. Again, above all, Chinese people are practical in my observation, and if it's clear that the United States is taking advantage of its strengths, including its relationships with friends and like-minded countries, if the United States is doing smart things and avoiding dumb things, then we are going to be even stronger than we are today. And within that overall economic strength, I think John Greenert and I both agree that the U.S. can take care of the military requirements such that Chinese military aggression would ultimately against American allies would fail. That's true at Taiwan. It's true in the Senkakus. It's true in anywhere else around China's periphery. So we have the capabilities. I think we're beginning to realize that the competition is on, and if we can do the right things, shooting that over the long term we can make this world better both for Americans and for Chinese, then I think we have the right attitude. And I see green shoots of that idea in some places. We are not cutting off communications with China the way we'd really cut them off with the Soviet Union for all of those years. We have a recognition that there are many common challenges we have, but I think we have an increasing realization also that we're just not going to talk China into this. We have to have the power, military, economic, policy based in order to direct us in the right direction and to exact penalties if it doesn't go right, in addition to the incentives.
Thank you. I think that's a really thoughtful mix of realism and optimism. And I'd like to thank all of the panelists for a great discussion. And now I'm going to turn things over to Adam Goldstein, the executive chairman of KNNX Corporation, for some closing remarks. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ben, and I add my thanks to all of the panelists. In the 20 years that a number of us have been working with SAFE, I always want to take the opportunity to commend my colleagues from the military side of the Energy Security Leadership Council, not only for their incredibly distinguished careers in the military, but obviously their willingness to exhibit volunteer leadership thereafter. As Admiral Greener said at the beginning, the point of this, the point of Pillars of Power, is to act so that we can compete effectively in this century in a way that there's a synthesis of interest of the civilian and defense sectors, in a way that accomplishes reindustrialization, advanced manufacturing capability, and technological leadership in the areas that have been discussed in the last hour are critical to our viability in the future. And the way to accomplish most of that, and I'm certainly not in a minute or a few seconds going to rehash 30 recommendations of the Pillars of Power, but it's about diversification of capability, diversification of assets, and we need to get on with it. Urgency was the word of the hour. Thank you.